folks, so I want to sort of unpack some of what happened in that documentary and connect it to this overarching lesson about setting that we've been working through since last week. So when we first watched the documentary, I really just asked you to write down some quotations, some things that people said or that the narrator said that stood out to you, and then to really reflect on how one of those quotations connected to the overarching message of the documentary as a whole and what the director of the documentary is trying to teach us, trying to convey to us, what is that director's argument. And you did a wonderful job in Schoology sort of unpacking some of the bigger picture ideas of the documentary, of the fight for freedom, of the conflict between needing to fight for freedom and for justice, and also falling into violence and anger and rage, and how that's not always necessarily positive either, and that the documentary doesn't necessarily have clear, overt protagonists that, like, because this is real life, these protesters aren't perfect, amazing humans who are coming in on a white horse to save the day for democracy in Hong Kong. They're also flawed because they're real people and they're struggling, and some of them are violent and angry, and some of them are confused, and the whole documentary, I think, presents the issue as appropriately complex, because it is appropriately complex, that while we as Americans can value freedom and democracy and know that that is a good thing to fight for, we can also recognize the difficulty and the tension of what's going on in that documentary. And I think that's a huge part of what we need to talk about here. And so to that end, the idea of setting is really important, right? So if we think about the two parts of setting that we normally talk about where and when. Okay, so we think about where. We're in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is part of China without being part of China, so that's really important. It is an independent province. It has its own government and its own structure, but only for a limited time. But it is, it's connected to China. It's right there. It's the island right off the coast of China. There's lots of Chinese people who come and go. It looks like China. It feels like China. They speak Chinese. And so in terms of the spatial setting, Hong Kong is spatially very linked to China. And that's important, because if Hong Kong had more physical distance from China, the fight for democracy might not be as challenging as it is, and it might not be as hot and angry and sometimes violent as it is, because there's that physical proximity, and also just so many of those shared, the shared language, the shared, what the buildings look like, who the people are, their history, their culture, all of that is sort of connected to that space. The time is right now, and so I think some of that is important too. We know that the Chinese government is really problematic right now. I don't think that that's a politically controversial thing to say. I think that's actually one of the only things that it seems like most people can agree with, is that there are some big problems with the Chinese government right now. We know that they are an authoritarian government. They do not have a fair justice system. They put protesters in prison, for example. There isn't really a freedom of speech or freedom of the press in the way that we would expect it here in America. We know that the Chinese government is engaging in some really terrible behavior with the Uyghurs, which is a Muslim group of Chinese people in China that are, being sort of rounded up in China. And we know that the Chinese government is very eagerly awaiting 2040, when, which is only 20 years away, when Hong Kong is no longer independent. All of that's part of the temporal setting, the authoritarianism in China, the world stage, the fact that China is gaining power and momentum, all of that's happening sort of right now, simultaneously to the temporal setting of it's 20 years away from the end of this fight. They've only got 20 more years to achieve democracy in Hong Kong and hopefully break fully from China. That's the goal of these protesters. So all of that is really critical to what's going on in the documentary. So those are the two pieces of setting that we often think about. When I ask you what's the setting of a text, people will tell me it's the place and they'll tell me it's the time. The two pieces that we've added this year are the social setting and the psychological setting. And I think for this documentary, those two pieces are really important. So if we think about the social setting, rules, expectations, laws, norms, culture, wow, that's really huge here, right? We think about the culture and the society of China, that stuff I was just talking about, the authoritarianism, the fear within Hong Kong of the imminent end to their independence as a free sort of governing body. We also think about the degree to which a lot of people in Hong Kong are very patriotic to China. One of the protesters wrote in that letter, I'm sorry that I'm not the obedient daughter that you wanted. They feel like they're letting their parents down because of their engagement in protest. Certainly the culture is not friendly to protesters. They can't just rally in a space like you might see in America for political protest. That they will get arrested, they will be taken to jail, and they're sort of always in fear of those pieces. And so that's a huge part of that social and psychological that social setting, and also just the culture within the protesters too. When you see the different kinds of protesters and how they're engaging and how they're choosing to do that. And then the psychological setting, what do these people believe in? What is their mindset? So fear is a huge part of that psychological setting, and also devotion. A lot of those protesters, you heard them say, if I die, that's fine. If I have to die in order to bring democracy to Hong Kong, okay, that's worth it. That's a huge part of that psychological setting. And likewise, this real battle between democracy and authoritarianism, that's a huge part of this psychological setting. And sort of, what do people believe in? What are they afraid of? Where do they stand? And so what you're going to be doing here for the rest of this class, for the rest of this activity, is sort of taking those pieces, which hopefully I was able to help kind of unpack for you, and connecting them to what the documentary is teaching us, and specifically how is the setting really critical to those pieces. And this is real life, this isn't a fictional text where the setting is this sort of this thing that's crafted by an author to help shape a theme. This is a real place and a real time that is right now, and sort of what's going on in that space right now. So that's what you're going to be doing here. I hope this was a helpful little video to sort of unpack some of those pieces for you, and good luck with your writing assignment.